At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. Quack stood motionless, once again witnessing the strange behavior of the galaxy's most fearsome predators, kneeling the moment the human ambassador entered the meeting room. Why did this scene repeat itself every time the human arrived? Why did such fierce creatures show so much respect to someone so small, that tiny, fragile-looking being? The questions nagged at Quack until he finally turned to the side, ready to voice his doubts for all the avian faction to hear. His feathered chest inflated and deflated, the brilliant blue and yellow plumage bathing under the warm light of the vast council chamber. The chamber itself was large, with curved walls that rose hundreds of meters overhead, designed to accommodate species of every conceivable size and shape. Light filtered through transparent panels in the ceiling, creating pools of golden illumination that shifted as the station rotated throughout its orbit. Quack's keen eyes focused on Garsov, his white avian friend, of another feathered species entirely. Where Quack's people were compact and vibrant, Garsov's people were tall and elegant, with long necks and pristine white feathers that seemed to glow. "Garsov," Quack chirped, his voice exuding the melodious quality common to his species. "Do you know why even that enormous Enegg kneels every time he sees the human?" Enegg was impossible to miss in any gathering. The leader of the predator faction was a magnificent specimen, a quadruped whose sleek, muscular form moved with a gentleness that belied his tremendous size. His fur was a deep midnight blue, and his eyes held an intelligence that had unnerved more than one delegate during tense negotiations. He was strength personified, elegance incarnate, a creature that could have torn through bulkheads with his claws, yet chose diplomacy. And yet, every single time the human ambassador entered a room, this apex predator would lower himself to the ground in a gesture of profound respect, causing all other predators to follow suit. Garsov turned his long neck toward Quack, his small eyes blinking. "I don't know why, Quack. You know this is not the first time you've asked this, right?" The reminder stung, but Quack was undeterred. He simply turned to the other avians, scattered throughout their section of the chamber. The avian faction occupied a series of elevated perches and platforms designed to accommodate their preferences for height and open air. As his gaze swept across his fellow delegates, he saw the magnificent diversity of their kind. Some bore strange colors he'd never seen before arriving at the Galactic Council. Feathers of crimson and green, purple and orange, combinations that nature had crafted on worlds he'd never visited. Some had very long beaks, thin and delicate, like precision instruments, while others had short, powerful beaks, built for cracking seeds harder than steel. Some possessed elaborate crests that rose from their heads like crowns, while others had smooth, sleek skulls that gave them an aerodynamic profile. Quack raised his voice, letting it travel across the avian section. "Does anyone know why the predator faction always kneels or bows to the humans?" The effect was immediate and dramatic. Heads swiveled, feathers ruffled, and suddenly every avian in the section had an opinion. Some insisted they'd never noticed such behavior. Others claimed they had noticed, but assumed it was a cultural custom they didn't understand. A few suggested it might be a power play, some kind of psychological manipulation. One particularly excitable delegate from a species Quack didn't recognize began theorizing about ancient treaties and blood debts. Within moments, what had been a simple question had erupted into a full-fledged debate. The avian section transformed into a mess of chirps, squawks, whistles, and calls, each voice trying to be heard over the others. It was a symphony of opinion and passion. each member of the avian faction contributing their thoughts with that particular enthusiasm their kind was famous for. But then Quack realized what he had done. The infamous avian vocalization had been unleashed. That high-pitched collective disorderly noise that seemed to bother every single other species in the room without exception. He saw delegates from the aquatic faction pressing their translation devices closer to their auditory organs. Their faces twisted in what he'd learned to recognize as discomfort. The insectoid representatives were clicking their mandibles in clear irritation, and even the blob creatures seemed to be distancing themselves from the avians. "Order!" The voice boomed across the chamber with the force of a thunderclap, cutting through the avian chaos like a blade through water. "I demand order in this chamber!" The Galactic Council's president stood on his raised platform, a position of authority that put him above all other delegates. He was a purple bipedal creature. Ridges ran across his bald head in parallel lines, and his forearms were crossed in a gesture that transcended species barriers, clearly conveying his displeasure. His eyes, large and multifaceted, swept across the chamber before settling unmistakably on the avian section. "This is the third time just today that the avian faction has failed to control their beaks," he said. "If I have to reprimand you again today, I will purchase a containment field for your section, and I will make you pay for it. Every single credit." Silence fell over the avians like a heavy blanket. Garsov leaned close to Quack, his voice quiet, but the accusation in it was unmistakable. "This is your fault. You know the other species already find us annoying, and you just made it so much worse. We're trying to be taken seriously here, Quack, and you're making us look like children who can't control themselves." Quack felt his crest droop slightly, the physical manifestation of shame that his species couldn't hide. Garsov was right, of course. The avian faction worked hard to overcome the stereotypes that followed them, that they were too emotional, too loud, too chaotic for serious diplomatic work. And with one question, Quack had reinforced every negative perception their detractors held. But even as he prepared to accept defeat, something in him rebelled. Not today. He wasn't going to let this go, not when the question had bothered him for months, not when he knew others wondered the same thing but were too afraid to ask. Quack turned back to Garsov, his eyes bright with renewed determination. "Ask him." Garsov blinked slowly, confusion written in the tilt of his head. "Ask who what?" "Ask the human directly. Why do all the predators in this room kneel when they see him?" Quack's voice was urgent now, intense. "We could ambush him on his way out, after the council meeting is finished. Just talk to him, Garsov. Just ask." Garsov's white feathers ruffled in what Quack recognized as anxiety. "I don't know, Quack. I'm rather fond of the humans. They've always been kind to our faction, always voted in favor of our proposals when they could. I don't want to make things awkward or seem like we're interrogating them." "Please," Quack pressed, sensing weakness in his friend's resolve. "I'll owe you a favor, a big one. You know I'm good for it." Garsov was quiet for a long moment, his small eyes distant as he weighed the request. The council meeting continued around them, discussions of trade routes and territorial disputes fading into background noise, as Quack waited for his friend's decision. Finally, Garsov sighed, a sound like wind through tall grass. "Fine, but you're approaching him, Quack. This is your obsession, your question. I'll come with you for moral support, but you're doing the talking." Quack's crest rose back to its full height, his chest puffing out. "Deal! You won't regret this, Garsov. I promise." "I already regret it," Garsov muttered, but there was a hint of amusement in his tone. 2 hours later, Quack and Garsov found themselves in a part of the station they rarely ventured into. The Deathworlder section was a realm unto itself. designed and maintained for species that came from high gravity, high pressure, or otherwise extreme environments. The corridor they'd chosen connected the docking bay to the meeting chamber, a main thoroughfare that the human ambassador would have to pass through on his way to his transport. The differences were immediately apparent. The floors here were reinforced, designed to support beings of tremendous mass. The walls were thicker, the materials more robust. Even the air tasted different, heavier somehow, though Quack wasn't sure if that was real or his imagination playing tricks on him. As they waited, perched on a bench designed for species much larger than themselves, their feet dangling well above the floor, Quack couldn't help but notice the attention they were receiving. Every being that passed through the corridor stared at them. Some were obvious about it, stopping mid-stride to gaze at the two avians with expressions that ranged from curiosity to confusion to something that might have been suspicion. Others were more subtle, but Quack's species had evolved as both predator and prey, and he could feel the weight of those glances like physical touches. A massive creature that looked like it was made of living stone lumbered past, each footfall causing tremors in the deck plating. Its eyes, glowing with internal heat, fixed on them for a long moment before it continued on its way. "No one wants us here," Garsov whispered. His white feathers were starting to show stress patterns, small trembles that ran through his plumage. "We should go, Quack. This was a bad idea. The air here isn't very good for us either, can't you feel it? It's too thick, too heavy. Our lungs aren't designed for this." Quack straightened on the bench, forcing confidence into his posture even though his own heart was beating faster than it should. "Our avian lungs can handle large variations in oxygen levels. You're overreacting, Garsov. We've been here for less than half an hour and you're already acting like we're suffocating." "It's not just the air," Garsov countered, his long neck swiveling to track another group of beings as they passed, their conversation dying as they noticed the avians. "Can't you feel it? The way they look at us? We don't belong here, Quack. This isn't our section. These aren't our people." Before Quack could respond, movement at the far end of the corridor caught his attention. A figure had emerged from the council chamber, smaller than most of the beings in this section, but unmistakable in its bipedal gait and the distinctive clothing that marked it as human. "There!" Quark breathed, all thoughts of retreat forgotten. "There he is!" The human was moving at a brisk pace, clearly someone with places to be and schedules to keep. He was talking into a communication device, his head slightly bowed in concentration, and he hadn't noticed the two avians yet. Garsov's reaction was immediate. He stood on the bench and gave Quack a firm push, nearly sending his smaller friend tumbling off the edge. "Go! You promised you'd be the one to approach him." Quack caught his balance with a flutter of wings, shooting Garsov a look of betrayal before launching himself into the air. He didn't have the endurance for long flights, none of his species did, but he could manage short distances. He glided down from the bench and landed in the human's path, his claws clicking on the metal floor. Up close, Quack was reminded of why so many species found humans unsettling. They were small, yes, but there was something about them that didn't quite fit. Their eyes faced forward like predators, but they moved with the skittishness of prey. They were soft-looking, seemingly fragile, yet they came from a death world with gravity that would crush most avian species. They smiled with their teeth showing, a threat display in most cultures, yet seemed genuinely friendly. This particular human, whose name Quack had learned was Leonard Thorne, stopped walking and looked down at Quack with an expression of surprise. His eyebrows, those strange patches of hair above his eyes, rose. "Oh, hello there!" Quack felt Garsov land beside him, his friend's presence a comforting weight in his peripheral vision. Leonard's surprise seemed to deepen. "Two of you, in this corridor!" He looked around, as if checking to make sure he was indeed in the Death Worlder section and not somewhere else entirely. "Is everything all right? Are you lost?" "No, Ambassador Thorne," Quack said quickly, his translator rendering his chirps into galactic standard. "We're exactly where we meant to be. I was hoping I could ask you a question." Leonard blinked, clearly not expecting this. He glanced at his communication device, then back at the avians, and something in his expression softened. "You came all the way to the Death Worlder section just to ask me a question? You couldn't have just sent a message to my office?" "It's a sensitive question," Quack admitted, feeling heat rise in his feathers. "And I wanted to ask in person, if that's all right." Leonard studied them for a moment longer, then shrugged in that peculiar human gesture. "Well, I'm already here, and you clearly went to some effort. Sure, ask away." Quack took a breath, steadying himself. "Why do all the predators kneel or bow when you enter a room? Especially Enegg, the leader of their faction. I've watched it happen dozens of times now, and I can't figure it out. You're small. No offense. And humans aren't known as particularly violent warriors. So why do the most powerful predators in the galaxy show you such profound respect?" Leonard's eyebrows rose even higher, and then he sighed, a long, deep exhalation that seemed to deflate him slightly. "You know, I'm actually surprised no one's asked that before. Well, no, that's not quite true. I'm surprised it took this long for someone to ask, and I suppose it makes sense that the first to ask would be one of the loud avians." Quack felt his chest flatten in embarrassment, but before he could respond, Garsov stepped forward. His voice was soft yet firm, marked by that particular tone of wounded dignity. "We always do our best not to offend the other species, Ambassador. It's not our fault that our nature is simply more expressive than most." Leonard's expression shifted immediately, something like remorse crossing his features. "Oh, I know. I didn't mean any offense. Your vocalizations are just part of who you are, like how humans gesture with our hands when we talk, even when the person we're talking to is on the other end of a communication device and can't see us." He smiled slightly. "I actually find it charming, if I'm being honest. Better to be passionate and loud than cold and silent." Garsov's feathers smoothed somewhat, and Quack felt a surge of gratitude for the human's quick diplomacy. Leonard looked between them, his expression becoming more serious. "The story about the predators is a bit long, though. Are you sure you want to hear it here, of all places?" He gestured around the corridor, where several beings had slowed their pace, clearly eavesdropping on the conversation. "We don't mind," Quack said quickly, speaking for both of them. Garsov nodded agreement, his curiosity clearly overcoming his earlier anxiety. Leonard smiled, and this time there was a warmth to it, the kind of expression that suggested he was about to share something he genuinely enjoyed talking about. "Well, you asked for it." He leaned against the wall, getting comfortable, and began his tale. "It all began about 50 years ago, on a small moon orbiting a gas giant in the XB42 system. A group of humans were exploring the local wildlife, cataloging species, that sort of thing. Standard survey work." He paused, his smile growing wider. "They stumbled across this little four-legged creature. Couldn't have been bigger than, about this big." He held his hands apart, indicating something roughly the size of a large fruit. Apparently, it was the weakest of a litter, and its mother had abandoned it, left it to die because it wasn't worth the resources to keep alive. Leonard's smile became almost mischievous. "So, of course, the humans adopted it because it was fluffy and cute and had big eyes." Quack and Garsov exchanged a confused glance. Garsov spoke first, his tone uncertain. "That's normal among your kind? Among mine, the weakest are pushed from the nest. It's necessary for the survival of the stronger offspring. When resources are limited and—" "My species isn't quite that brutal," Quack interrupted, "though we do prioritize the healthy young." But the notion of just adopting an alien creature because it looked fluffy and cute doesn't make any sense, Ambassador. What practical purpose would that serve? Leonard laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that echoed in the corridor. I don't expect you to understand. Not really. Your species evolved differently, with different priorities and different instincts. But trust me when I say that most humans would have done the same thing in that situation. It doesn't matter that it was an unknown alien. It was small, it was vulnerable, it had big eyes and soft fur, and it looked up at them with what they interpreted as trust. He shook his head, still smiling. That's all it takes for humans. We're ridiculous like that. We've domesticated dozens of species on our own world for no reason other than we thought they were cute or interesting. We keep animals as companions, even when they serve no practical purpose. It's just what we do. Quack felt completely lost. He looked at Garsov, whose expression suggested he was equally confused. But, Ambassador, what does this story have to do with the predators kneeling? I'm getting there, Leonard assured them, settling more comfortably against the wall. So, these humans, they took the little creature back to their ship. They ran scans, analyzed its biology, tried to figure out what it needed to be healthy. They discovered it was severely malnourished, probably would have died within a day or two if they'd left it. So, they started feeding it, keeping it warm, monitoring its health. Quack's eyes widened. They brought it to their ship? An unknown alien organism from an unexplored moon? Not just brought it to their ship, Leonard continued, clearly enjoying their reactions now. After doing a detailed study of the moon's conditions and observing the behavioral tendencies of the adult members of that species, they discovered something troubling. The adults didn't just abandon weak offspring, they ate them. Cannibalism as a form of population control and resource management. Even Garsov made a soft sound of distress, his feathers ruffling. So the humans made a decision, Leonard said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. They decided to bring the creature all the way back to Earth. They were going to raise it themselves, even though it would have a hard time adapting to Earth's higher gravity, to the bacteria in our environment, to a diet based on Earth foods instead of whatever it had evolved to eat. Quack swallowed hard, pieces of a puzzle beginning to click together in his mind. But he didn't interrupt. Neither did Garsov. They stood transfixed as Leonard continued his story, oblivious to the other beings passing behind them, several of whom had stopped to listen openly now. They named the little creature Furball, Leonard said, and there was such genuine affection in his voice that Quack felt something in his chest tighten. Started off as a joke because it was basically just a ball of fur with eyes and these oversized paws that it kept tripping over. But the name stuck. Everyone involved in the project started calling it Furball, and the creature seemed to respond to it, so that became its name. Leonard's expression grew more animated as he talked, his hands moving in those unconscious human gestures. They introduced Furball to Earth's environment slowly. Set up a facility on the farm in the countryside. Lots of open space, clean air, room to run. The first few weeks were touch and go. Furball would try to stand and just collapse under the gravity. Its legs weren't strong enough yet. The researchers had to carry it everywhere, feed it by hand, keep it warm at night because it couldn't regulate its body temperature properly. His eyes grew distant, as if he could see the scene playing out. But humans are stubborn. They didn't give up. They built special harnesses to help Furball walk while its muscles developed. They adjusted its diet constantly, trying different combinations of Earth foods until they found what worked. Fed it chicken at first, which fortunately its system could process. Small pieces, easy to digest. Then gradually introduced other proteins, vegetables, supplements. Leonard continued. And slowly, over months, Furball adapted. Its legs grew stronger. The muscle fibers became denser. Where a normal member of its species might have had muscle tissue suited for low gravity, Furball was developing something entirely different. Earth's gravity was forging it into something its species had never produced before. He leaned forward slightly, clearly caught up in his own story. The really amazing thing was when Furball started picking up human language. Not speaking it, obviously, its vocal structures weren't designed for that, but understanding it. Simple commands at first, like come and stay. But then more complex concepts. Careful, that's hot. Or, this food is for you, not for the chickens. One of the researchers kept a journal of Furball's progress, documented every word it learned, every behavior it picked up. Leonard's hands moved as he spoke, painting pictures in the air. Eventually, Furball could understand quite sophisticated instructions. Go to the north field and check if the gate is closed, kind of thing. It learned the names of the humans, could tell them apart not just by sight, but by the way they walked, their mannerisms. When Dr. Natalie was having a bad day, Furball would bring her things, little gifts. Rocks it found pretty, feathers from the farm birds, trying to comfort her the only way it knew how. Quack found himself leaning in, captivated despite himself. Garsov had gone completely still, his eyes fixed on the human. 20 years later, Leonard continued, his voice soft. Furball was an adult, the size of a house easily, maybe bigger. The researchers had to keep expanding the facility as it grew. All that Earth gravity, all that Earth food, all that space to run and play and grow strong. The muscles it had developed were incredible, like steel cables under its fur. When the veterinary team did scans, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Bone density triple what should have been possible for that species. Muscle fiber composition that was closer to Earth predators than its own kind. A cardiovascular system that had adapted to survive with less oxygen. Leonard's expression filled with a kind of pride. Furball could run faster than any Earth predator, even the ones that had evolved specifically for speed. Could leap distances that should have been impossible for something that size. In play sessions, when it would chase the autonomous drones the researchers used for exercise, its acceleration was breathtaking. 0 to full sprint in seconds, then stopping on a credit chip. Perfect control. He paused, letting the image settle. But here's the thing that made Furball special. Despite all that power, all that strength, it was gentle. Quack and Garsov exchanged another look, and Quack could see that his friend had made the same connection he had, but neither of them spoke, letting the human finish his tale. Eventually, Leonard said, his voice softening, Furball decided it wanted to reconnect with its species. It communicated this through the human researchers it had bonded with, through the limited sign language they developed together. Used the symbols for home and family and others like me. The humans were heartbroken, honestly. They'd raised this creature from near death, spent 2 decades with it, loved it like family. But they understood. They'd always known this day might come. Leonard scratched his head, a gesture that seemed almost embarrassed. So they took it back, brought it home to its moon. And Furball defeated the alpha of its species in combat in the first week after being introduced back into its population. He let that statement hang in the air for a moment. It wasn't even close, from what I understand. The old alpha was big, experienced, had won dozens of challenges, but Furball? Furball had been forged in Earth's crushing gravity, fed Earth food for 20 years, trained by humans who taught it discipline and strategy. The fight lasted less than a minute. Furball didn't even kill the previous alpha, just pinned it down and held it there until submission was clear. The humans had taught it that killing wasn't always necessary, you see, that there was strength in mercy. Leonard's expression became distinctly awkward. The old alpha lived and eventually became one of Furball's advisors later. Then Furball spent a few years learning its species' language properly, understanding their culture, their traditions. It was like watching two worlds collide. Furball would introduce ideas it had learned from humans: cooperation, planning, resource sharing. And its species would slowly adopt them. And, well, he paused, clearly uncomfortable. Mating had to continue the bloodline, biological imperative and all that. Furball had offspring, lots of them. Quack's beak opened, his mind reeling. So, are you saying that— Yes, Leonard interrupted, and now he was grinning openly. The current leader of the Predator faction, Enig, is the same creature we called Furball on Earth. He still answers to that name, by the way. When he visits Earth, which he does every few years, all the humans call him Furball, and he doesn't mind at all. Seems to prefer it, actually. He's still a mascot there. There are toys made in his likeness, children's books about his story, animated shows. The original researchers, the ones who found him, they're all retired now, but they still keep in touch. Send him messages on his birthday, share pictures of their grandchildren, visit when they can. The silence that followed was profound. Quack felt his world reorganizing itself around this new information. The mightiest predator in the Galactic Council, the being whose mere presence made other species nervous, whose strength was legendary, whose wisdom in negotiations had resolved conflicts that might have led to wars, was an abandoned runt that humans had adopted because it was fluffy and cute and had big eyes. Leonard glanced at his communication device and winced. I'm already late for my transport. The pilot is going to kill me. He pushed off from the wall, straightening his clothing. But I hope that answers your question. He looked between them, his expression kind. Any creature raised with love and care, given the opportunity to reach its full potential, can become extraordinary. That's what humans believe, anyway. With a nod to each of them, Leonard turned and began walking quickly down the corridor, already bringing his communication device back up to his ear. Quack and Garsov stood in silence for a long moment, watching the human's retreating figure. Around them, the other beings who had stopped to listen were murmuring among themselves, the story spreading like ripples across water. Finally, Garsov spoke, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and amusement that perfectly captured what Quack was feeling. The mightiest predator in the council, the leader of their entire faction, the being that makes warriors from high-gravity worlds nervous, is called Furball on Earth, Quack finished, and despite everything, despite the weight of this revelation, he felt laughter bubbling up in his chest. Furball! The galaxy's most fearful predator is named Furball, and he was raised by humans who thought he was cute. Garsov's laughter joined his, high and bright, the kind of sound that had gotten them in trouble earlier, but now seemed perfect for the absurdity of the situation. We should probably go, Garsov managed between chuckles, before someone asks why we're standing in the Death World corridor laughing like fools. Agreed, Quack said, spreading his wings. But as they prepared to leave, he took one last look down the corridor where Leonard had disappeared. Garsov? Yes? I think I understand now why they kneel. Quack's voice was soft, thoughtful. It's not about strength or fear or any kind of power dynamic we'd recognize. It's about something else entirely. Garsov tilted his head, considering this. Compassion? He offered. Maybe, Quack said. Or maybe it's about seeing potential where others see weakness. That's a very human thing to say, Garsov said. Yes, Quack said. Yes, it is. They took flight together, their wings carrying them back toward the avian section, back to familiar territory. But Quack knew that something had changed in those few minutes of conversation. He'd come seeking an answer to a simple question about protocol and respect, about the strange behavior of predators around humans. What he'd found instead was a story that challenged every assumption he'd held about strength, about value, about what it meant to be powerful. The strongest predator in the galaxy knelt to humans, not because humans were stronger, but because they had been kind when they didn't have to be, compassionate when it served no practical purpose, loving when logic would have dictated otherwise. And somehow, Quack thought as he glided through the station's corridors with his friend beside him, that made perfect sense after all. Because if there was one thing he'd learned about humans in his time on the Galactic Council, it was that they rarely did things the logical way. They did things the human way, which was often inefficient, frequently impractical, occasionally infuriating, but somehow, against all odds, remarkably effective. They'd taken a dying runt and turned it into a legend. They'd chosen compassion over pragmatism and gained the eternal loyalty of an entire faction. They'd named a future leader of the Predator faction Furball because they thought it was cute, and somehow that being wore the name with pride. Yes, Quack thought, his crest rising with satisfaction. That was very human indeed.